We had the huge breaking news just less than an hour ago. Hunter Biden facing 3 felony indictment counts based on his illegal gun possession and lying on a gun form. Miranda Devine of the New York Post, author of Laptop from Hell, with us now on this one. Miranda, just what is your first reaction to this as the news broke? What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think my first reaction is that we kind of expected that this would happen because David Weiss was completely humiliated, as was the Attorney General Merrick Garland, when this plea deal fell apart and was exposed for all the world to see as a sham. And so they had to do something. Hunter Biden's lawyers are not happy about this, but it was inevitable. But, you know, the fact is the gun charge is the very least of it. David Weiss dragged the chain, allowed the statute of limitations to run out on the tax charges. There are no FARA, no other more important charges. This is the one charge, the gun charge, that has absolutely nothing to do with Joe Biden. So from the White House point of view, it's a safe charge.
Okay, Miranda, do you think, when you look at it, do you think that there will be charges? Because that's the question I was just asking. To me, the next question that needs to be asked is, what's going to happen with the tax charges? That's an easy case to make. Hunter Biden did not pay his taxes. That is a felony based on the amount of dollars that he did not pay. This would also be a relatively easy case to bring. That, to your point, could also bring in Joe Biden, because there certainly was the argument that some of those funds were commingled, that they were being earned because of Joe Biden's tenure as vice president. Do you think there'll be charges brought there? Where do you think we stand with those?
Yeah, look, I think there will be, or at least some sort of attempt, because we saw in one of the filings initially after the plea deal collapsed from the Delaware prosecutors that they were talking about moving it to another jurisdiction. And remember, it was California and Washington, D.C., where the charges were going to have to be brought. And that was kind of what brought Weiss's entire inquiry after 5 years undone when Gary Shapley, the whistleblower, realized that, you know, this was a setup because supposedly David Weiss, the U.S. attorney, had ultimate authority. He had full powers, Merrick Garland said under oath, and yet he had been knocked back by the Biden-appointed U.S. attorney in California, Martin Estrada, from bringing charges there. So, you know, Martin Estrada is still there. You can't imagine that it's going to be easy for the prosecutors, even if they wanted to do this, and they've shown a zero interest in it. The one thing I will say that's interesting is that the actual prosecutor that's going in there is a guy called Leo Weiss, who has a reputation as being kind of a tough guy. And he was brought in at the last minute because Leslie Wolf and the other team that had worked on this for the 5 years and had been called out by Gary Shapley and the other whistleblower as being sort of in the tank for the Bidens, tipping them off on searches and interviews and so on. They just disappeared off the case. And this guy, Leo Weiss, gets brought in, presumably to just do a straight job. And so that was kind of why you saw the plea deal collapse that day, because Leo Weiss is sort of trying to follow along the script that he's been handed at the last minute. But ultimately, in his DNA, he can't do something so duplicitous. So he answers the judge honestly, and everything, collapsed.
Miranda Devine of the New York Post with us, author of Laptop from Hell, about this Hunter Biden and Biden crime family saga, which has reached quite an interesting chapter today. To that end, Miranda, do you give us your sense? I mean, we know that no one truly can know, but is it your sense that Biden plans to push through this and tell everybody that, this has nothing to do with him and everything will be fine? Or are you hearing from your sources, and is your own sense that this could be part of a Democrat palace coup of sorts to have Biden finally step aside and have some other option, whether it's Kamala or someone else?
Yeah, I don't think they're that organized. And why ruin a winning formula? It's worked for him up to now. It's effectively the basement option. This is the least transparent, least accessible not just president, but I mean, I would say world leader in the West. I have never seen a president or a prime minister be so reluctant and resistant to answering questions. And it's not as if he has a barking mad media breathing down his neck on these issues. Whenever he does a press conference and has his hand-picked crew of handmaidens, they never ask any questions about this. It's only, there are a few people, including the New York Post's very good Stephen Nelson, who rarely get asked to give a formal question, but they manage to shout something afterwards, and Joe Biden just turns his back. Karine Jean-Pierre just turns her back. It's a farce, and why would they change it? Because it works for them. Because the point is that half the country is in the dark because half the media is in the tank for the Bidens, and you've seen that just the last few days. They're scoffing at the impeachment inquiry. They're saying there's no evidence, and then they change it to there's no hard evidence or there's no direct evidence. They and the Democrats are singing from exactly the same songbook, but they're kind of desperate. I think they've run out of road. There's just too much evidence. It's too overwhelming. And, there have to be journalists, and I know there are journalists at the New York Times, maybe at the Washington Post, but I know at the New York Times, who have integrity. And they just can't stand for this anymore. It's embarrassing. You've got Watergate on steroids staring you in the face, and you're studiously avoiding it as if, in fact, you take your orders from the intelligence community, from the CIA. I mean, we saw yesterday David Ignatius, who's, renowned, his reputation is that he basically writes what the CIA thinks. And he says yesterday, it's time for Biden to go. And so that seems to me like, I've always suspected for some time that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden have had some sort of protection from the deep state. There's been so much covering up, especially of what happened in Ukraine, but also China and Russia, and you can't believe that the vice president's son was ricocheting around the world as a drug addict, with hookers and all these compromising situations without the CIA keeping an eye on him or being aware at least what he was doing. So there's always been in the shadows this specter of a guardian angel. And I think they did a lot of mopping up after Joe Biden and the Burisma deal in Ukraine. And I think that's falling apart now. And I think that they're as much covering themselves as Joe Biden now when they want to get rid of him, or not get rid of him, but they are suggesting via David Ignatius he should stand aside.
Okay, you just hit on something that I think is important, Miranda, and I'll continue to reinforce that you should get all the Pulitzer Prizes that the New York Times and the Washington Post got for the fake Russia collusion stories with what you wrote about Hunter Biden's laptop. At some point, it becomes embarrassing to continue to carry water for Joe Biden. I think we saw that happen for Merrick Garland and Weiss and the entire Department of Justice when Judge Noriega blew up their sweetheart plea deal. And now we've got these charges that are brought. I think you're starting to see it from some journalists, Washington Post, New York Times. Certainly it's cut through the American public. Even CNN's having to discuss the fact that 61%, I think it was, of the American public thinks Joe Biden was involved with Hunter Biden when it comes to his business dealings. What do you think the relationship is like now? Last question for you. Between the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland and company, and Joe Biden. What's that relationship like now as we see charges brought against his son?
Look, I think ginger. I think everybody is just trying to not rock the boat and just have this go through with the minimum of fuss while managing and massaging the media, because really, as long as the media remains tame on this, they'll get away with it. But I think that's what the point of that memo was that went out simultaneously with the announcement by Kevin McCarthy of the impeachment inquiry. The memo went out from the White House counsel's office, from Ian Sams, basically saying to the media, do your job and cover for Joe Biden, step up. You've got to really hold the Republicans' feet to the fire, because this is just, they have no evidence. And it was ridiculous. I mean, the memo basically quoted a whole bunch of rhino Republicans who are, for whatever reason, especially in the Senate, backing Joe Biden. I mean, doing Joe Biden's bidding. And I don't know if that's because Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden have a long-standing relationship going back decades as Senate colleagues, or if it's because Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and various other Republicans in the Senate are just completely obsessed about Ukraine. Mitch McConnell has told us that is his number one priority, more important than inflation, the cost of living, the border, anything that really affects Americans. He cares about Ukraine and keeping on spending billions of dollars. And Joe Biden, I think, has been playing Mitch McConnell very well, professing reluctance, not really, but and making Mitch McConnell sing for his supper. I don't know what back-channel communications are going on, but just on the face value, you're looking at it and you're saying Joe Biden has something that he can hold over Mitch McConnell because Mitch McConnell has telegraphed that his most important priority is Ukraine. So therefore, what's Joe Biden's most important priority? Protecting himself from his son's misbehavior. And so those two, they're both deal makers, and I'm sure their two priorities are aligning at the moment behind the scenes.
Good work as always, Miranda. We'll talk to you again soon. Encourage everybody to go read the Post column that you've got up right now, and I'm sure you'll have some good reaction to these charges as well.
Thanks so much, guys.